gonna wait for the folks connecting to audio to be connected. All right, well, welcome back, y'all. It's been not long since we've seen you and not long since we'll see you again. We are going to start our meeting as we do every time with an opening inspiration, and Andrea, one of our committee members, has volunteered to do that for us tonight. Go ahead, Andrea.
Hi, folks. Well, I love that I can do anything I want that's inspiring me right now. It's graduation season, and congratulations to all of you who have graduated this year and also have family members who've graduated. It's 20 years since I got my college degree, and it was a big deal. I was the first person in my very large family to get a four-year degree, but I'm not the first person to go to college. My grandmother was the first person to go to college. She got an associate's degree, and she got an associate's degree after dropping out of high school with a pregnancy when she was 16, and then moving on and getting married and raising a family of 6 other children. She didn't raise her first child. And my grandfather was forced to stop working with a heart condition, and she went back to school to get her associate's degree to be a caregiver in a nursing facility. And nobody really believed she could do it. She did it while she was taking care of him and raising my mom and the rest of her children. And when she did it, my grandfather gave her this poem. And then she gave it to me when I got my degree. So I'm going to read you this poem. It Couldn't Be Done by Edgar Albert Guest. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but with a chuckle he replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But he took off his coat and he took off his hat, and the first thing we knew, he'd begun it. With a lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin, just take off your coat and go to it. Just starting to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. And I have to say, a lot of people thought PCEF couldn't happen, and here we are. So that's my Ardell's inspiration for you.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, we're just gonna start with a little review of the sort of virtual participation guidelines. Committee meetings are, of course, open to the public, but the public is asked to observe and listen. There are opportunities to provide public comment. If you want to provide public comment, please indicate, please put in the chat box your name and also just say that you want to provide public comment. It will begin at a little after 6:05, so in just a few minutes. So if you do want to provide public comment, make sure and get your chat in now. We'll also use the chat box for introductions. We ask that people give their name and affiliation. The raise hand and video functions or sort of having videos on are only for committee members and staff who are participating in the meeting. Also a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and that closed captioning is available. You can find it by going to the menu bar in your Zoom, and it's usually under the More button where you get those 3 dots, and then you can see a drop-down menu and select View if you can view the full transcript there. So with that, I think we will start introductions, and I'm going to just call on committee members first to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to staff. So Andrea, you can go first since you just gave us the opening.
Andrea Hamburg, she, her, committee member.
Robin?
Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him.
Megan,
Megan Horst, committee member, she, her.
Faith,
Hello, good evening. Faith Graham, she, her.
Ranfis,
Randvis Genetino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
and Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member.
And Shanice Clark and Maria Sippin are their two other committee members who are excused tonight. I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, and she, her. James,
I have to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. James Valdez, PCEF staff, and he, him pronouns.
Janet,
Janet Hammer, PCEF staff, she, her pronouns.
Sam,
PCEF staff, Sam Barrasso, he, him pronouns.
and we have another staff, PCEF staff who is joining us for the first time, Wing.
Hi, everybody. Wing Grabowski, he, him, PCEF staff.
And Sam, do you want to read the introductions from the chat box?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got Anissa Pemberton with us, they, them, Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition Coordinator. We've got Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. Angela Crowley Cook, Oregon Solar Energy Industries Association, she, her. Angela Prevedelli, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We've got Lynn Yern Schroeder, Housing Development Center. Jay Ward, he, him, Energy Trust of Oregon. Joshua Baker, he, him, Lloyd Eco District. Daniela Chansey, she, her, Related Northwest. Steve Achilles, Exceed Enterprises, he, him. Deidre Schutz, Nutrition Garden RX, she, her.
And I don't see that anyone in the chat box signed up for public comment. Is there anyone on the phone line?
Does not look like we have anyone on the phone.
Okay. Thanks, James. Okay, well, we will just jump right into our agenda then. And we'll start with kind of a little bit of an overview of pathways to public comment.
Katie, do we need minutes?
Oh, man, it's just, every time now. It was so honored, so good for so long. Yes, has everybody had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes from May 12th? And just, if you could, committee members, if you could raise your hand if you if you have any amendments or corrections. All right, it looks like we are all good to go and those minutes are approved. Next time, I will remember it. Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Okay, sorry. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I think, Katie, let's just go ahead and advance it to the next slide. Okay. So just wanted to provide, oh, go back one more. There we go. Just wanted to provide a little bit of context for folks here around workforce and contractor equity as we proceed with this section. There's going to be a couple pieces we'll jump into today, but with regards to workforce and contractor equity, this is a conversation that we're resuming from our May 5th conversation. There's many pieces of this that you all have heard of, but what we wanted to do is just provide a little context on where we've been, where we're going, and where we'll go. I want to remind folks that within the PCEF legislation, within the code, it calls for the committee to develop a workforce and contractor equity agreement plan, as well as agreements that folks, that all grant recipients will have to agree to. In order to help bring this together, we convened stakeholders on January 21st in a half-day design session. Stepped away from that, iterated on a whole lot of work, and then met with stakeholders in between that time and met with a whole group of stakeholders again the last week of April in across three different days over 2-hour sessions to get additional feedback. We presented to you all on May 5th some of that initial feedback, as well as what we essentially proposed in terms of our approach for workforce and contractor equity. And at the same time, when we presented when we presented on May 5th, we had an outstanding survey out to folks that had participated in that late April session. that survey wrapped up. We took that survey, those survey results, we digest that, made updates to the workforce and contractor equity essentially approach based on both that survey as well as the feedback we received from you all on May 5th. And so that's a little bit of what we'll talk about, is just provide you all what changed between May 5th now and what we hope to go out to public comment with. In addition to that, we will also obviously talk about our recommended proposal around how we think about and address prevailing wages within the context of PCEF. So it's a little bit of what we'll talk about here, but just as we kind of step into that, the context I think I want to lay out with this is, as we've done our outreach, connected with folks, there's a lot of different projects we've had in mind, we've heard about, that we think will come through, that we expect to see. And those projects, I want to acknowledge, all look a whole lot of different shapes and sizes. There's I think this region has benefited from the fact that we had programs such as Clean Energy Works that happened, and a lot of learnings that I know many folks within this committee and many folks elsewhere got to benefit from. And we have had a long history, maybe long may not be the term exactly, but we have a strong history with working on community benefit agreements and other types of forms there. So I think those reflect in many ways the wide scope in which we've engaged in the development of workforce and contractor equity agreements. However, I also just want to acknowledge this program is new. There hasn't been a workforce and contractor equity agreement that's been developed in the context of a grant program that would be granting out dollars in the range of the tens of thousands as well as in the million plus. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty, and I think that has certainly been a key theme to a lot of what we've been working on, has been that uncertainty, a lot of that learning that we're going to learn certainly this first year and then those years to come. So that's a lot of the framing in which we want to at least hope we walk you into, is that there's just going to be a lot of learning, and a lot of our thinking has been framed with thinking about all those frontline projects we expect to get, sort of what are the cases that we want to design around. We recognize that what we design for has to fit ultimately all sorts of projects, but we sort of wanted to think about what were those key entities that we thought about as we put this together. So that's a lot of what we're reflecting on here. And I don't think I need to say too much more, but I just wanted to provide some of that context before I turned over to Janet to really walk you through just a handful of high-level details of what changed between May 5th and today. So with that, next slide, and turn over to Janet.
I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Yeah, well, as Sam noted, we've been incorporating changes based on feedback from the committee and the community, trying to balance the different project sizes, the types, the stages of readiness, the fact that it's nonprofit organizations applying and different kinds of nonprofits. What are these different use cases that might need to, how this will fit? So kind of the main things that and we've also been really thinking, when we think about the use cases and who's applying, we've really tried to think about what unintended consequences might be a result, like who are we trying to reach that might be left out or pushed out or be less competitive in the scoring? Did we get the scoring right? And just really knowing that we'll continue to iterate and learn, but trying to be as solid as possible with this first rollout for comment. So let's take a look at those key elements that we landed on to support our intention to advance workforce and contractor equity at this moment in time in the PCEF journey. So first, building on Jeffrey and Michael's suggestion last week that we kind of think about this capital investment threshold. So projects that are of a certain size, we'll come back to that conversation about what that threshold is, but of a certain size that are single site projects will be required to identify their contractor and define their inclusive utilization goals as part of the application. So there was this notion that at a certain size, like you should know that and be able to put that in the application. So we separated that. Second, applications that are, or applicants that are successful are going to have specific deliverables that are part of the contract. We've always had that in the conversation, but just to clarify, you're going to name a recruitment strategy. So kind of first step with staff, if you are approved, is we confirm that recruitment strategy has happened as you stated. And the next thing is those hiring goals need to be defined. Let's review that those are on track. And then the next thing is tracking performance there. So Even though we don't always have all the information that we're looking for up front, we have ideas around, you know, those strategies, and we can have those checkpoints along the way. The third, as kind of thinking about as we continue to learn and improve, this reporting is required. And you know, that's going to be so important to our workforce and contractor equity plan, and that's going to inform future programming, you know, where we might see these are areas we're moving the needle and here's where we're still short, and let's think about how that influences this year's funding cycle requests, or but it's also going to come back on future applications, because we're going to start having information about different organizations, nonprofits and contractors, and you know, we're going to be able to better score on record of performance because people will be reporting on their performance. So there's an accountability piece for the grant, but also just how it shapes this work moving forward, both where we think about supporting growth of the pipeline and the businesses, and also being able to score more effectively in the future. The fourth thing is in the planning grants. Planning grants are supposed to position you to be able to successfully apply, and so it would be certainly appropriate that one of the things we're looking for in a deliverable there is that you're going to be addressing that contractor recruitment, utilization, and hiring plan. So part of what we would want out of those planning grants is that people are farther along with that information, so they're ready to submit. And then fifth, building on Michael's suggestion around prevailing wage. So again, projects that are over a certain size, that are, you know, single site project, that we will require prevailing wage be paid to workers in trades for which a prevailing wage standard is defined. So on those large projects. So those are the ways that we're proposing, recommending to address those important, complex issues at this moment in time.
So let that sink in for a minute before I think it may be worthwhile to elaborate on a few of those points. But I expect it'd be interesting what questions come up first.
Definitely.
No questions? No comments? Jeffrey?
I guess my question is, are we going to go into more detail on these in the next couple of slides, or are we supposed to like cash it out right here?
This is where we hope to talk it through. I think we can. I think what it's going to be. Yep, I think this is where we can talk it through. So.
Okay. All right. The only one that I think the one that's going to be a point of contention potentially is going to be the threshold one for prevailing wage. So I'm just curious to hear what my fellow committee members feel about number 5. Just throwing that out there. Just kind of wanted to get a gauge of the room.
And so maybe what I'll jump in here is just to start that off. When we sent a memo that we posted and sent a memo to staff around a recommendation for a threshold at. Originally, we started the threshold at about 500,000 was where we said at a single site specific project. Currently, the threshold would be, and it's a little different. The current threshold is defined as $750,000 of public funds going into a project would be the threshold at which prevailing wage at a single site applies. We proposed lowering that and creating a body where we explore that over time. In alignment with sort of the effort with that, we want for a range of reasons, that similar threshold was what we had been thinking about for number 1, where at that point you would also be going in there and defining who is your contractor that you expect to be working with. That's the same threshold at which we'd say, we want to know the contractor that you're working with, what is their record of performance, and what is their diverse subcontractor utilization, as well as diverse workforce utilization. And so I think we started there. I think what we had followed up was I think it's worthwhile that we consider lowering that to 350,000 to send a clearer signal to the market around our intentions around prevailing wage. And so that's, I want to acknowledge just that difference that originally in our staff memo that's posted is that we proposed 500,000. And Michael, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that, but we propose lowering that to 350,000 to send a more clear signal around our intentions, to signal to the market that prevailing wage is what we want to see. However, we want to create room for an on-ramp for those that don't necessarily engage historically with public projects and or engage with prevailing wage projects to ramp on and have a conversation iteratively in a space where we explore what it means to move that or explore that relationship between prevailing wage, workforce diversity, and contractor diversity.
So Michael has his hand up.
So I spoke with Janet and Sam and Robin the other day, and if you don't mind, I'd like to take the floor for a few minutes. I think that what I'd like to start out with is a little history of prevailing wage and Bacon-Davis laws. So Bacon-Davis laws were finally passed in 1913, and they were passed specifically to keep Black workers from working on federal projects. It was a racist exclusionary law specifically made to keep Black workers from working on projects. Prevailing wage followed in about 30 states quite quickly after that through the 1930s, and then continued on to more states after World War II. And these prevailing wage laws were used to allow unions to bid on projects and push out non-union contractors. Unions up until, well, no, that's a lie, until today, but really up until, I don't know, 15 years ago, are white male-run exclusionary organizations for white men. I would like to preface it all by saying I have been a union member for all of my jobs for most of my life. I've been involved in one union or another. So I am a very pro-union person. But the history of it is to keep minority contractors and minority workers off of jobs, and to exclude them from jobs. And they do this through the power of, in Oregon, through the power of bully. Bully can be very pick and choose when it comes to punishing folks for violations, and they will violate if they'll get people not paid, contractors not paid for the smallest violations. Can you excuse me for 1 second? I apologize. Oh, we're good. So bully will fine people. General contractors will, on prevailing wage jobs, will not pay their contractors for minor violations in the prevailing wage law rules. So coming from that point of, from that place, that is very recent history. That's not even the history of memory. That's the history of, like, since I've been an electrician, working as a union electrician. But prevailing wage also has really good things in it, which is proper pay for employees, for workers. It provides paycheck protections, wage theft protections that are enforceable. It provides a higher standard of living, that it's not just paycheck to paycheck. The difference between a prevailing wage job and a non-prevailing wage job in this state, for carpenters, for electricians, for plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, boiler makers, is about $10 an hour. And that's about right at $20,000 a year in pay difference. And to me, that's payments on a home in Portland. That's being able to continue to live in Portland with the rising housing costs. Being able to support a family in Portland with rising housing costs, that $20,000 difference. So when I was talking with Janet and Sam and proposed, you know, I think that I'm of the belief that all commercial work should be prevailing wage. I don't think that that is necessarily fair to a lot of small and emerging contractors. Residential, which is going to be a lot of our work, also doesn't fall under prevailing wage. Residential is any 4-story structure or smaller that is all for residents, doesn't have any commercial use. Just as a quick definition of residential work. I was recommending that we have reporting. We're going to be using reporting software. We're going to be reporting on the 180% wage. I suggest, my suggestion would be something along the lines of that at $750,000, state BOLI kicks in because that's state law. Between 350,000 and 750,000, that I would ask for prevailing wages, but the reporting system would be our own reporting system. BOLI would not be involved in that reporting. We would be doing that reporting using the same system that we're using for the 135% or 180% of minimum wage for the 2345, and wrap it right into that. There are a lot of specialties, but on any given job, there's probably only going to be a few specialties that fall under the prevailing wages as defined by BOLI. This would prevent contractors from getting, for lack of a better word, blacklisted from government contracts because of paperwork mistakes, because of, you know, not getting payment right. For any of the myriad of reasons that BOLI uses as an excuse, they would not have to do that. It also wouldn't, one of the big things about BOLI is it takes a lot of staff time to fill out, you know, certified payrolls and all the paperwork that BOLI requires. That would all be a non-issue if we just went ahead and made it a part of our reporting system, and shouldn't add much more burden to the contractors. And any burden that's added to the contractors, I really hope that we're trying to go high, not race to the bottom. We're trying to race to the top. So hopefully contractors will put all of those additional required reporting hours that PCEF has into their bids for the work. I hope that assuages some of the issues. You know, the unions which are white dominated have you know, have set prevailing wage. What white unions negotiate with their contractors is what's used as the prevailing wage. I know out of my union, we have, you know, close to 100 small shops that are union shops that are less than 10 people. And they all bid out at union wages, and they're all making it. Some have been around for decades, just staying as small shops. So I don't think that the actual pay should be an issue. I don't think that black and brown labor is worth less than white labor. I think that the biggest problem with prevailing wage is when BOLI uses it to punish black and brown contractors, as opposed to their white contracting counterparts. So I think that's sort of a summary of what we talked about. I hope that gives a little bit of history to it, some of the good, some of the bad of it, and where I think we could take it from here.
Thanks, Michael. Ranfis?
Sorry, trying to still work the mute unmute button. Yeah, thanks, Michael, for the background on prevailing wage. I think only thing I would add here is the Oregon Center for Public Policy the past couple of years reported that wage theft is a huge problem in the construction industry, and that workers are constantly being misclassified and underpaid and undervalued. And I think that's definitely a struggle that we're struggling in the industry. I also understand there's definitely some challenges for contractors and being paid on time from general contractors and owners on projects. And I hope that PCEF can be a systems change to how current business is done. And I think one of the benefits I see with prevailing wage historically is it is trying to capture the market wage for an industry at a given time in a given region. And that's very helpful. There's also been provisions that ensure that workers know what the wages are. And I think one of the downsides I've tried to point out here with PCEFs, even 180% minimum wage standard is it's unclear how workers on site will know what their wages are. And I think it's in the construction industry where wage theft is rampant, it's really important that workers know what the wages are, because unfortunately our forms of enforcement for protecting workers from wage theft, it's complaint driven. So BOLI really doesn't look into work sites unless there's a wage claim being filed. And even in that event, we're talking about a recession where we're going to see budget cuts in enforcement agencies like BOLI. So, I think it's all to say here, I think there is a lot of value in promoting a prevailing wage standard that's calculating not just wages, but benefits. And that's something I've heard from multiple stakeholders, that we aren't considering family benefits, healthcare benefits, things that really drive what's access for people of color, for women, but especially for single parents who are thinking about how they're going to go into a career and be able to provide their kids. I know there are people who are making the calculation of, if I have healthcare that I can cover my kids, that's the career that I'm going to go into. And I think there are definitely models in this construction industry that folks are providing those benefits. Any way that we could try to encourage that, I think it's a great win for how we promote clean energy jobs. The last thing I'll say about prevailing wage is, we've seen statistical data that says when it comes to wage equity, prevailing wage makes sure that women and people of color are paid the same wages as their white male counterparts. And I think the industry, when there are no clear wage standards, generally there are pay differentials and disparities that we see. And I think it's time that we build a new system. And I think a prevailing wage standard can be very beneficial. And I just want to thank the PCEF team to try to identify a good middle road approach as we're all learning how this program can work. So I'll just pause there, but just wanted to highlight, I think, some of the additional benefits for this consideration.
Thanks, Ramses. Jeffrey?
And first, they say thank you both to Michael and Ramses for that very holistic perspective. I'm on the contractor side, so I wanted to kind of see where you guys were coming from before I add anything. By the way, I am pro prevailing wage. I think everybody needs to get paid at a living wage, and with benefits. The fringe benefits are very important for the workers. End of the day, everybody deserves a high quality of life, especially brown and Black people and minorities, people of color in general, who have holistically and through history have not had access to those type of jobs, good paying jobs. From my perspective, the biggest thing was just the history of prevailing wage and how it has locked out people of color in the industry for a long time. And the biggest thing is I want to promote prevailing wage, but I don't want to lock out the very community that we're trying to reach, because a lot of contractors, especially small contractors, are actually used to be workers. And a lot of them get into the industry, become their own contractors because they don't see representation of people that look like them. And so they decide, I'm gonna go branch out and I'm gonna make the change myself. So for people like that, you know, they usually start as a mom and pop, and then they don't have the back office to support, you know, all the BOLI things that Michael just spoke of with prevailing, with all the requirements. So I just wanted to kind of see where get a pulse check on that. And the biggest thing is to highlight that we don't isolate the very groups that we're trying to get a hold of. As far as the workforce goes, I also had a conversation with Janet and Sam about this. It's, as Mike spoke to, the unions and also just non-unions where they have training agents. They at this point are not as diverse as we would like them to be, which is why we're having these conversations in the first place. And that's still an obstacle to this day. So a lot of ways that people do get into the industry is sadly through the non-prevailing wage route. It's not ideal, it's not where we want them to be, but that's just the fact of the matter for a lot of people getting into industry, people of color. So I would love this program to be a bridge to move those people, get them enough continuity of work so they can move to prevailing wage and pay the people at the rate that they deserve to be paid. But we have to get them there first. So as long as that's being considered, that's all I really care about, because at the end of the day, I care about the people, and I care about, you need the contractors as well as the workforce. So both need to benefit. So I want to make sure we don't lock out the small contractors that we're trying to reach in the first place.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Robin?
Yeah, I just want to quickly kind of echo what Jeffrey just mentioned. I used to finance minority contractors, and a good number of them told me that they didn't want to pursue prevailing wage jobs because the paperwork and the hassles and the bureaucracy and the treatment by BOLI was just not worth it. I've also met clients of mine that used to pursue prevailing wage jobs, and for those same reasons dropped out. And so they don't, because of those reasons. So, they didn't have the opportunity to get the bigger jobs. And so what I like about the approach that Michael presented is that it's kind of a stepping stone, right? At BOLI requires 750. If we go to 350 or, plus or minus or whatever number we end up deciding, here's an opportunity for a young business to pursue a prevailing wage-like job, pay its workers prevailing wages, but not necessarily have to deal with the paperwork and the hassles and the bureaucracy that's associated. And there are funds that are part of PCEF that these contractors can take advantage of, so they can start developing the back office and the operations and the record keeping, so that, maybe a year from 2 years, or maybe the next project, they're ready now to do a BOLI style prevailing wage. So I like there is an opportunity for this to be a stepping stone for more businesses, minority contractors, to pursue prevailing wage jobs. Whereas from what I've seen, a lot of them just did not want to pursue it because it just did not make sense for them.
Thanks, Robin. Megan?
Hi, yeah, thanks to all the committee members who spoke before me, because really helping me learn a lot about kind of the history and the challenges of rolling this out and avoiding some of the pitfalls of like a well-intended effort. And kind of on the contractor side, I kind of defer to all of you all in hearing your viewpoints. And so I don't know, I think, so I'm not going to say a whole lot on that exactly. I'm learning a lot, and I guess the 350K is sounding like a reasonable reason to me. I hope we have supports for the organizations, the contractors that are involved with PCEF to help them come in compliance with this, and to like, yeah, that don't end up being how I'm understanding bully to be, like a coming down really hard and perhaps turning out the exact folks we want to be. So I hope we set up in our PCEF system, and that's what I see with reporting and et cetera. But I hope there's a little bit more like both monitoring to find the bad problems and make sure those are accounted for, but also to help organizations that just need help getting in compliance on all this. So that's one thought. But I actually wanted to say a couple slightly unrelated to this exact topic comments, and that's because they come to areas I'm a little more familiar with. And a lot of this conversation on this has been very much about contractors working on construction projects. And I'm a bit more familiar with the nonprofit world working, you know, in the green infrastructure, urban ag community. So I'm just thinking a lot about how this would apply to that world. And in that world, a lot of people, you know, people working in the nonprofit sector are also often woefully underpaid. Sometimes their social justice passions are exploited purposefully, and sometimes it's just because the nonprofit organizations are living very leanly on grant funding and they're struggling to pay their workers well. So I guess I just wonder, I hope that this is a help to these organizations to pay their workers better. And I don't know if we resolve the issue that like they're gonna be struggling with paying some workers more than what their current workers make. If they're on a PCEF project, they'll make more. And I'm just curious if we've thought through how to help them with that, or if we're able to help them. You know, ideally we're setting a standard that, and yeah, and another thought I have is that a lot of these, you know, it should enable them to pay them more, which is great, but the other sources of funding they're getting are not enabling them to do that. So it's gonna, hopefully we push that. So that's kind of one area that I'm thinking about. And another one I brought up in my one-on-one meeting, but I'm just thinking a lot about particular workers in contexts, and I don't expect answers right now, but I'm thinking about particularly vulnerable workers, in addition to Black, brown workers, ones that maybe intersect with these, but also I'm just curious about workers who are formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated, like what the requirements on this, like I just how that fits into this conversation. I had a bit of a conversation with staff about that, but I hope we're thoughtful about that. And another group is workers with disabilities who may be relying on some sort of government benefits. And like, does this requirement, how does that interact with that? I wouldn't want to have unintended negative consequences for either of those vulnerable groups. Yeah, so those are, sorry, I know that was kind of a lot of different directions. That's all I have to say.
No, thank you, Megan. Those are all important points. Ramses?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope we can continue to, you know, when we, you know, talk about the challenges that we're going to be dealing around construction, especially around the utilization of minority contractors and the utilization of diverse workers, that we keep trying to, you know, elevate the conversation and raise the bar. And I think, you know, I think it's, we need other institutions to also raise the bar, that it can't just be PCEF, but we need the city of Portland, Multnomah County, you know, even private partners to elevate their game around better inclusion for minority contractors, better utilization of diverse workers. You know, I just want to point out that I think there are some really good benefits from prevailing wage. You know, prevailing wage isn't the only determinant of what makes an inclusive workforce. We need to make sure we take a holistic approach around like apprenticeship standards, apprenticeship programs. Not all of them are built the same way. Some programs have higher recruitment, retention practices, and getting really moving the needle around diversifying the workforce. You know, I think we really need to start, you know, hopefully, as I saw one of our recommendations on a high road, the development of a high road committee to review this is really, you know, as we were analyzing these programs, that we're taking a data-driven approach, make sure that we are really looking at what are the strategies that are really driving an inclusive workforce, diverse contracting. You know, I think I just want to recognize that there are currently minority contractors that are working, paying people the prevailing wage and benefits, who are doing a good job of diversifying the workforce. We're also union contractors, but I think, you know, I just wanted to make sure that there are, the barriers for this industry continue to be other factors, like what are other parties, owners doing to utilize contractors in a diverse workforce. I hope that we can continue to elevate this conversation, look at other tools that we need to diversify contracting in the workforce, and I think just keep taking a data-driven approach and just keep raising the bar. But I appreciate the conversation. I think when it comes to previously incarcerated workers, I don't know of any limitations, or I know there's historical barriers to get in the workforce. I know we have seen programs that have set goals for displaced workers, such as project labor agreements in the LA area and the Bay Area, that could be replicated here in Oregon, but we just haven't seen that being promoted actively yet. I could be wrong. I know for works who are currently incarcerated that are doing work, unfortunately our laws are not doing a good job of making sure that folks who are incarcerated who are doing work are actually being paid a competitive wage and benefits. I think there's a weird whole terrible backstory to that. And then from my understanding with folks with disabilities, I think there's some recent law changes that ensure that the minimum wage laws apply to folks with disabilities. Again, I think there's some really bad backstory about how we've properly compensated workers with disabilities in the workplace. But I hope that PCEF can be a vehicle to continue to raise the bar about how we just honestly pay people for the skills of their labor. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks. Faith, I think your hand was up and then it was down and now it's back up. So I want to let you make your comment now.
I actually, my comment will be, and I can just wait to find out. That's why I keep putting it down again, but I'll ask it now and we'll see if it comes, if it gets answered.
Okay.
I really, really appreciate the history lesson that I'm getting. I had no idea. I didn't know Davis-Bacon was inherently racist, and I would love to learn more about that. If somebody wants to point me in the direction of some resources that I can become a better advocate, I would really, really love that. I guess what I don't know after this conversation is where our worker and worker rights and contractors folks come down. So what I don't know is Michael and Jeffrey and Ranfis in particular, what do you think about the proposal? So
before we get that answer,
yes,
I'd like
perfect.
to everybody hold on to that one, because I think we want to ask everyone that question. But I wanted to, Andrea, you have had your hand up for a while, and then Michael, and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your thoughts. I will say I'm happy to see the adjustment down, and in the recommendation of prevailing wage, I think we have an opportunity with this money to push other public agencies to do more with prevailing wage law. And I'll just always be the person who says this. I think we need to be asking a lot of questions in the first few rounds of contracts about who's being left out of our funding process, so that we aren't perpetuating the kind of contractor barriers that we see in other publicly funded projects. And then I guess, so my other question about enforceability before BOLI comes into play at 750 is, what kind of staff resources would it take to ensure, or administrative burden would it place on the employers and contractors to ensure that workers know what they should be paid on a PCEF project that's subject to prevailing wage, and how will we verify that if that reporting comes into play for us? So those are my thoughts and questions.
Thanks, Andrea. Michael?
So I just had a few things that I want to say. Thank you, Andrea. First of all, I think we're all here, but I just want to really reinforce the idea that we want everybody to succeed, right? We want our minority contractors to succeed. We want our workforce to succeed. We want our nonprofits to succeed, and we want to make life in the communities better. We really want to. We really want all of this to work out, succeed. I know that in the workforce contractor equity agreement, maybe it's not in there, but somewhere is that we will be providing software to and training in our data collection system. So our contractors are already going to be doing that. I don't know how much more burden, Andrea, that that putting in prevailing wage reporting into that would be. I think that it might be fairly minimal because once the information's in there, you're just inputting it bi-weekly or whatever your payroll system happens to be weekly. And so I hope that's not too much of a burden. I think one of the things that we have to do with this is if we are going to do our own sort of prevailing wage check along with our 180% check and our utilization checks, is that we need to reach out and let the contractors know, and not just reach out and like putting out for public, but actually like getting on the phone and calling contractors and explaining that our version of prevailing wage for under 750 is not BOLI's prevailing wage. That it's not going to be the experience of BOLI. It's going to be the experience of PCEF. I think that's really important that we do that. And I think that was all that I really wanted to say there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Jeffrey?
Yeah, to kind of get into Faith's answer Faith's question, I'm okay with it being at the current proposed 350 as long as we're open to that being changed down the line if we're not getting the results we want, if we don't see the participation from minority contractors because, you know, like, look, I'm just gonna pass on it, you know, because for whatever reason, there's not enough continuity of work within that amount of money or whatever it may be. So I'm okay with it because at the end of the day, we all want prevailing wage. That is the end goal. But I don't want us to get in our own way of getting the people group that we want to have the benefit at the same time. So, I mean, as long as, you know, everybody's open to that, I'm okay with it being at the 350. But as long as we're open to changing that, if we get the results and we're not getting the results we want, we're not getting the participation we want from the community.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So I guess I would ask the rest of the committee then to kind of maybe just articulate your feelings about moving forward with the recommendations laid out in the memo that was that is part of the meeting documents, but lowering the threshold from the recommended 500,000 down to 350,000. And if it, I think I'll just go ahead and kind of, this isn't an official decision, but we just want to, you know, get your okay with moving forward. So I just will kind of call your name and you can indicate whether or not you would support moving forward with that methodology. Although Faith, I see you have your hand up. So do you have a question or a comment?
I do. I just wanted to question, Michael, you made a comment about not being BOLI prevailing wage. It is the BOLI administered prevailing wage rate, just not the process, right? Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Okay, so I'm gonna just start with the order in which you appear on my screen. Andrea?
I am in support. I appreciate especially the intention given to making sure that applicants understand the supports available to them in the process, and support lowering the threshold to 350.
Thanks. Robin?
I'm in support.
Thanks. Jeffrey? You just said you were in support, but you can say it again.
In support.
Thanks. Megan?
I support.
Faith?
Yeah, I'm in support.
Great. Thank you. Ranfis? Ranfis?
Sorry, background noise. I think this is a good middle of the road approach. You know, I'll be pretty transparent. You know, I think I think prevailing wage, you know, should always be lower. You know, federal projects starts at $2,000, but you know, I do think this is a good middle road approach. You know, I think when I looked at the prevailing wage, it's 2 pages. When I look at what we're going to be required to report on, it's going to fit some of the same buckets. But I'm going to be patient, work with folks on this, and I think this is I'm going to support this.
Thanks. Michael?
I would like to reiterate some of the things Ramfi said, which is that I believe that prevailing wage should start at the $0 level. But I do think that this is a good middle of the road start. I hope that our contractors find the whole proposal useful and tolerable, and that they can get behind it and bid on the work, and so that then we can start actually dropping the level that prevailing wage kicks in on commercial projects. I am in support.
Thanks, Michael. All right, well, it is 6:57, so we just have a few minutes before we have a scheduled break. Are there, Sam or Janet, are there any other items that you wanted to call out in this conversation in workforce and contractor equity before we take a break and then move on to the next part of the agenda?
I think this is a good point for a break. I think these other elements will come up inevitably in the scoring criteria, so it won't be our only time to visit those details, but I think this is a good point for a break.
Yeah,
okay.
I just want to express huge appreciation for everybody's careful thinking and wrestling and being willing to take time for extra conversations to help us land on something as a first point of departure as we move forward. Really, really appreciate all the contributions that you've made.
All right, well, it is 6:59 now, so we're going to reconvene at 7:04.
And just a heads up, I'm going to pause the recording.
7:05. Okay, so we're gonna shift gears now a little bit into talking about the scoring criteria again. Although the workforce, a lot of the workforce and contractor equity stuff, you'll sort of see it come up a little bit later on in the conversation. I wanted to start with just a slide that outlines the types of grants. I think Robin rightly pointed out that we hadn't kind of put it all in one place and it was getting to feel a little bit muddled. And so this is just this slide kind of outlines the 5 types of grants that we have talked about with the committee. The mini grants, committee approved 400,000, recommending 400,000 for the annual allocation in year 1 for grants up to $5,000 each. You'll recall those have fairly limited and really like well-defined eligible activities. The second type of grant is this application support grants, and those are the ones that James gave a few presentations about. The committee approved a budget of 200,000 for those this year with up to $5,000 each. Again, a limited and well-defined list of eligible activities, but different than the types of activities that fall under the mini grant. The third one are the planning grants, and the committee approved an allocation of 1.5 million for planning grants in year one, recognizing that if we don't get applications that kind of total that amount, that the remainder could be used to fund other types of grants. Staff is recommending a $100,000 cap on those grants in year one. That hasn't been deliberated with the committee, but that's a staff recommendation. And just, this is not a comprehensive list, but just kind of wanted to note that activities can include research, feasibility study, technical consultation, outreach and engagement, kind of depending on the type of project, what stage of development it's in, and what the needs of the applicant are. Small grants, the cap is not yet defined. We have talked in the past a little bit about a $200,000 cap. Recently, we've been having some conversations within the subcommittee about potentially raising that a little bit. There is also some desire to kind of have it match up with some of the other dollar thresholds that we're using within the program. So that's not yet totally defined. There would be fewer application and reporting requirements than the large grants. And then the fifth one is the large grants. Those are the ones that we have spent the most time talking about, and that the scoring criteria that you all have been getting memos about and talking about during the committee meetings are really focused on the large grants. A cap for the large grants has not yet been defined. The strongest indication that the committee gave in our fairly limited conversation about a grant cap was that there was there seems to be interest in having a cap of some sort, and potentially tying it to like a percentage of total funds available. These grants, because they are bigger, will have the highest burden in terms of application and reporting requirements. Still trying to make it as minimally burdensome as possible, but just recognizing that those will have kind of the highest burden. So part of the reason that I wanted to have you all see these in one place is because we are going to ask the committee to allow staff to work with the subcommittee to draft the remainder of the documents that are needed for the public comment period. Using all of the input that we have gotten from full committee meetings that have been focused primarily on the large grants. The remaining documents will be related to all of these different types of grants and will reflect the values of the full committee and primarily include content that we've already discussed as part of our deliberation around the grant review process and around the large grant scoring criteria. So just to sort of be totally clear about what those documents are, the remaining documents would include scoring criteria for the planning grants and for the small grants, and the application questions related to those criteria for all grant types. The subcommittee has already started working on and iterating drafts of the large grant application. The small grant application more than likely will sort of be a subset of those questions, and the scoring criteria will be a subset of the large grant scoring criteria and or the same criteria but with different scoring guidance. So, and just also a reminder that the full committee will of course be able to weigh in on and provide additional input after the public comment period is over, and we'll have kind of 3 weeks after that where we'll have committee meetings to discuss both the public input and to kind of get additional feedback from the full committee on all of the documents that have been released for public comment. This is kind of a timing thing because we are trying to get the public comment out by June 1st, or documents out to public comment by June 1st, so that there can be 3 full weeks of public comment period in which we'll do a lot of outreach and trying to, with the assistance of Wing and other BPS and PCEF staff, to try and bring in as much input as possible. And then three weeks after that for the committee to deliberate and finalize all of the scoring criteria and application questions so that we can develop the RFP and get that out on the street. So that's the kind of staff. It's not really necessarily a proposal that you need to vote on, but that's kind of the direction that we're asking you to allow us to go. And so I just would like to, I guess, pause here and ask committee members to kind of give us an indication if you feel comfortable with that. So I'm seeing Megan nod. And I will note that Ranfis gave a thumbs up. We have Andrea gave a thumbs up. We have talked with Maria and Shanice about this as well in one-on-ones. Jeffrey gave a thumbs up. Faith gave a thumbs up. Michael thumbs up. Robin, I'm just going to assume you're a thumbs up because you're on the subcommittee, so you'll be seeing them anyway. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, you know, in an ideal world, we would have, you know, a couple more months to really work through all of this together. But frankly, a lot of it is, you know, fairly like kind of grinding, busy work. And so I think we have a good sense of the values you want us to move forward with. So now back to the large grant scoring criteria. So you all received a memo as a part of the meeting documents that were sent out. It would be useful to have that open during this part of the conversation. If you don't already have it open, hopefully you had a chance to review it ahead of time. There are 6 categories. Within each of those categories are a number of criteria related to those categories. And so what we're going to be asking from you tonight is to go through each of the criteria within a particular category and come to a shared understanding or shared agreement about what it means to get full points in that, for that criteria. And also to look at the list of criteria and ask the kind of the questions, does this capture everything that we want to score? Are these all things that we do want to score? Or do some of them feel like they might be unnecessary? I think that we probably, there also in the email that went out to committee members, there is a link to a survey. And we had initially thought we might have time to do that during the committee meeting, but I think we really would have to stay until midnight to get that done. So what we're asking committee members to do is, if we can focus on trying to come to a shared understanding of the guidance associated with each criteria, we'll update that scoring memo and send it out to everyone so that they can kind of use it as they're going through the survey. And then for each criteria, we'll ask you to rate them 1 to 5, with 5 being the most important. And recognizing that 1 does not mean it's unimportant. If you feel it's unimportant, it shouldn't be on the list. So they're all important, but just 1 to 5. And also noting that it's not a ranking. So we don't want people to be thinking about like within each category, here's the most important and then kind of going down. It could be that they are all equally important. So what we will use that for, staff will use the results of that survey to come up with a draft weighting system for each of the criteria and then each of the categories so that we can have a sense of how important it is to you as a committee. And then we can use that to assign weights that will impact kind of the amount of points that it goes to the overall score. And we'll bring that back for discussion at the next committee meeting on the 28th. Does that all make sense? That's kind of the flow of the conversation for the next 45 minutes. Great, then I think that we can just get started. So just a reminder that these are the categories. And luckily workforce benefits is near the end, so we won't get totally caught up on that one until closer to 8 o'clock. The first one is organizational capacity. And these are the draft criteria. So I think that what I'm going to do, even though you all have it, hopefully have it open in front of you, but I'll just read the description that is in the memo. They're relatively short for the sake of kind of folks on the phone who may not have that right in front of them. And then we can, and then I'll take a temperature check to see if people have comments, if they agree or disagree. So the first one, the first criteria is the organization has a stated mission and track record of delivering programs that benefit economically disadvantaged community members, including people of color, women, people with disabilities, and or the chronically underemployed. And how to receive full points, an organization would need more than 3 years of delivering programs that benefit communities identified in this criteria and a stated mission guiding this work. Anybody have thoughts on that? Is there, can we use the thumbs up feature if we're generally good with putting, and again, just a reminder that this is saying good to put it out to public comment, not that this is not our last chance at these things. Faith, Jeffrey, and Michael. I'm looking at you guys. Michael?
So many buttons to find on the computer in order to do this. So on number 6, applicants' organization's ability to manage funds responsibly and effectively. And I understand this is a point system. Is there anything in here that is actually a disqualifier?
So,
or is this all just points?
There is nothing in here right now that is a disqualifier. It's all just points.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have an opinion about that? Do you think that that is okay, or?
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. I often wonder when it says like revenues exceed expenditures. You know, I know that in the for-profit world, lots of companies run with expenditures far exceeding revenues for long periods of time. And so, I mean, but it is a point system, so I'm okay with that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Robin?
Yeah, it is a point system, but I want to make sure, I don't know where exactly we stand on it because we talked about this in the subcommittee. Is there still the possibility that we might have minimum thresholds for each category and or minimum points for certain things? We haven't really talked those details, but that concept has kind of surfaced. So I just wanted to, and if we do something like that, then it could be somewhat disqualifying.
So the full committee has in the past talked about setting a minimum threshold, specifically, I think most of the talk has been around setting a minimum threshold for kind of justice and equity related criteria. And they show up in a lot of different places, like in several different a lot of the different categories. We have not had that we've looked at what all of those criteria are, but we haven't gotten to the point where we have talked about setting a minimum thresholds there. So I guess I would ask the committee now, is that something that you feel we need to do in year one? I'm seeing either people shaking their heads no or just holding their heads very still. So, okay, I think that, so can I just ask the committee actually, did everyone get it? Did everybody have a chance to read through the memo? Okay, so if that being the case, maybe it doesn't make sense to read through them one by one. Maybe we just we will kind of, I'll just ask for kind of comments or issues that folks might have by category. So Michael had one comment that I think we have cleared up on the organizational capacity. Are there any other questions or concerns about the organizational capacity criteria? I feel good job. I feel like the subcommittee then, good job. We all sort of deserve cookies.
I do have a question, and I don't know where my hand raised thing, so I gave up.
Oh, dang it. Okay.
So no audit findings seems like a really high bar. I know it's a points even thing, but no audit findings seems like a high bar when I've worked with other organizations that have gone through an audit. Like an insignificant audit finding is still a finding. Like you only have one key for your locked cabinet. Probably you should have more than one. Still an audit finding. But so that struck me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one of the reasons in particular why we were wanting to look to get, like in the application, I think we'll be requesting 3 years of audited financials. Again, these are large grants. So for smaller grants, we wouldn't be requiring that. But for, because then you can see kind of if somebody had an audit finding and it was resolved, then you know, like that's good. They're listening to the kind of the feedback related to financial controls. But we were trying to set a fairly high bar for getting all points. Okay. Any other comments or questions related to the criteria, descriptions of how to get full points for in the organizational capacity section? Does this feel like everything that we would want to know about an organization's capacity in order to assess whether or not they could successfully complete a PCEF grant? Or not know, but score, everything we would want to score. Michael?
I was just going to say yes, because, you know, when I keep going back to when we started this, a whopping, we haven't been at this a year yet. What are we at? 7 or 8 months. But a few months ago, when we talked about how we wanted the application to be fairly easy and not time consuming, I think you guys have done a great job of getting a lot of information requests in here for large grants. I worry that if we go with any more stuff, that it's just that this is probably on the edge of burdensome already.
Yep. Ranfis?
Yeah, I mean, I think likewise, I think, you know, I think we're going to make some learning lessons on this. You know, I think, you know, we're, you know, I think we're going to have to take the long view on this. There might be some groups that don't have, you know, 3 years worth of audited financials, but I think this sends a signal to folks, like, you know, I think just for us to do a good due diligence, that might be helpful. And so folks will, you know, we'll start thinking about that, but it's not, again, it's not like a disqualifier. Folks can still score pretty strongly on other areas and still land on a competitive application. And so I think, you know, I think so long as we're still, you know, leading on the values of leading with, you know, social and racial justice and, you know, transparency, like I think we'll still see applications, though they might not score well on some of these key points, they can still be pretty competitive. So I think, you know, I feel pretty comfortable with this as a great starting point to just give the committee and the general public just a good window in terms of what an organization is and what their capacity is. And I know even that capacity component is subjective, but I feel like we're definitely leading on the values of, let's push on how we, check our own assumptions of what community groups are capable of doing. So I'm pretty comfortable with this.
Great. Okay, well, let's move on to the second category. And the second category has 8 criteria, and it's project description and scope. Any comments, concerns, notes on this one? Okay. The next one is environmental benefit. And this has 4 criteria within it. Greenhouse gas reduction, indirect greenhouse gas reduction potential, material and operational choices driven by embedded carbon and other environmental impacts, and that the project provides additional non-greenhouse gas environmental benefits. This is a pretty short list of criteria, but I mean, obviously environmental benefits is a primary objective of the program, but these criteria encompass a lot. Ranpeace?
I mean, I think this looks like a good start. I think my only questions that I think I've provided in just some notes that I wasn't able to attend the last subcommittee meeting is, are we only, requesting to keep track of CO2? Are we considering other greenhouse gas emissions? Like methane's a good example for something that could apply for other key components. So I think that's just a broader question for folks, given that greenhouse gas emission reduction is probably just broader than CO2, but just flagging that as a question.
Yeah, and I guess I would say, if I can just interject real quick, and then Faith and Megan, I do think that we have CO2 equivalent up there just because it's like common vernacular that gets used, but in sort of as we, land on models to estimate greenhouse gas reduction based on fuel source and things like that, I do think that it will be important to track more than just CO2 emissions. Faith?
I would just say this is obviously an important driver for PCEF and a really important category. It does cover a ton, even though that there are only 4 categories. I also imagine that during the public comment period, if we've missed something in the climate action plan that can be relevant to this process, we'll hear about it, and I hope we do. So if we can include that. But I haven't been back through the climate action plan with this in mind to think about what can we possibly include in PCEF that's not overly burdensome and yet really useful. And so I'm sure that you all have, and I'm also sure that the public will do that as we put it to public comment. So I'm comfortable with this list.
Thanks, Faith. Megan?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I like the short but sweet list. I was involved in the subcommittee, so I've had lots of chances, but there's a lot on the list. I don't always get to think about each one individually. Number 3, I'm reflecting on a little right now. I 100% appreciate it, and I want it in there. It's just going to be really complicated. These often involve like fairly complicated life cycle analyses questions, and sometimes there's like debated research. It may be hard for grant applicants to provide that detailed information and for reviewers to assess it equally from like an equal starting point, because it's just this is not one I know a lot about. I know more about food, so I should probably use that relevance. But solar panels, there is some embedded carbon in them and other environmental impacts of making them, and there's a lot of and it gets a little complicated, and it could be a tricky one for us. I appreciate it. And maybe it's fine as tricky, and we'll just see what we get from applications.
Yeah, I think that, so because we noted it, I did want to just kind of reference the description of what we would kind of how you would get full points in this, because I don't think that we are in a position as a program, or that our applicants are in a position to do that really like pretty in-depth and complex analysis, and then and kind of incorporate that into the tracking. So what we have written right now in terms of like how you get full points is that the applicant must demonstrate strong commitments to making choices about materials and supplies or supplies and operations that are based on an understanding of embedded carbon and other environmental impacts. Commitments can be demonstrated by documenting procurement and operations policies and/or certifications that detail how carbon and other environmental impacts are considered. So like green purchase criteria for office recycling, composting, policies about that reduce single occupancy and vehicle miles traveled. So it is, to your point, Megan, it is a little bit subjective. We're not going to be doing a lot of complicated math as part of the scoring for this criteria. Ranfis?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder, how would we handle an applicant that comes in with a contractor or a developer who can really give good, concrete examples of what they would do here? Would they be applicants that stand out, or are they still on the same, I think, level of other folks who, can kind of articulate what their commitment are, but not to the same level of explicit level of someone who's maybe partnering with a developer or a contractor?
Yeah, that's a good question. And right now it would be kind of the scoring panel. I mean, the scoring panels are going to, receive each panel will be looking at 10 to 15 applicants. So they may not even be aware of that application that has like really extensive documentation of the actual embedded carbon in kind of all parts of their project. So so it's possible that someone, who has way more documentation and is really doing a lot more might receive the same amount of points as somebody who has like just kind of good workplace policies and things like that, as the scoring guidance is written right now. And Michael and Janet also have their hands up. Michael?
Hi, thanks. I also want to, and I don't know how you do this, but I keep also going back a little further in our discussions, back to the beginning. And one of those things was clear and accessible language in our grant making. I got a couple of bachelor's degrees. Some of this I don't understand. I don't know if we're going to go back through it with an eye to language accessibility. But I just wanted to bring that up again as one of the early discussion points that we made in the grant making process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as much as you see us putting things out there that don't feel that way, please point it out, because sometimes we can, get a little deep in it. Janet?
Yeah, Michael, you're spot on. And we definitely have that intention of, once we lock down what it is we're trying to ask, to think about if there's ways to ask that in a more user-friendly way. So thank you for shining a light on that. I think for both 3 and 4, we were struggling with that. There's not an order of magnitude there. Like someone could put in massive habitat and flood control on number 4, and someone else did something, at a smaller scale, but it's a binary, like yes or no, because it wasn't really a thing for us to be able to like judge the apples and oranges. And similarly with that, I look at 3 as one of the ones that'll maybe iterate a bit with time, but it was similarly, I think the points go more on how strong that level of commitment and documentation looks like. Like if someone is saying like, we have a buy green policy and that's all they say, that looks different than we've done, you know, we're LEED certified and we've got a no red lit, you know, that the level of analysis and the level of commitment, there's ways to get at the points, but I share the concerns around it still trying to balance how we can include the various sizes and types and give some sort of scoring to something that is important. Remembering some of the backstory to where that one came from is if we think about 2 projects came forward and one is insulating and using some pretty kind of toxic, crappy stuff, and another one is much more like greener product, we would want to prioritize the one that was a greener product. So just trying to think about beyond our carbon reductions, what are the other environmental things that we're thinking about? Or if one fleet is just a regular 20-year-old trucks running on, you know, diesel, and another has a fleet with electric vehicles, like we would want to support the one that has those greener practices. So open to ideas on the scoring that, but that was the thinking behind that a little bit.
Ramfis?
Yeah, you know, I think for number 3, you know, things that come to mind are, you know, especially if you're constructing a building and you can know what the materials are using, you know, I know some, especially when you're talking about like a LEED certified program, we're talking about environmental product declarations that can give you the carbon footprint of a product. You know, I know DQ has been exploring, you know, what the environmental footprint is for, say, like concrete that's, you know, high, you know, heavy on in its industrial process. You know, I think developers are thinking about health product declarations, sort of trying to answer this question around how healthy, you know, are the, you know, materials. Yeah, I'm just, you know, curious how, you know, the balance of folks who say they'll, you know, buy green, and then those who can say we are going to use 100%, you know, materials that are healthy, that are using health product declarations or environmental product declarations. You know, I think, you know, I definitely want to continue pushing a system that's inclusive, but also that, you know, the curve is up for folks who are just showing exemplary work.
So that sounds a little bit like maybe it would make sense to modify the criteria for getting full points for this, for number 3, to be more like, not just demonstrate a strong commitment, but to like document that those choices are being made for this project. That's kind of what I feel like I was hearing Ramfis say. Does that sound right?
You know, I'd love to hear other committee members, but I think that's something that, you know, given our goals for PCEF to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, like, you know, I think when we can score folks who are making those strong concrete commitments. I know it's going to be a challenge for emerging groups, but that is a good exemplary thing that we want to push for the long run of the program for the span of 20 years. You know, I think, you know, getting, you know, big, I don't want to sort of say big, I think estimates of what is achievable, but the more concrete that we can get on these responses, we should reward that type of behavior.
Andrea?
Thank you for bringing that up, Ramfis, because, you know, I think about indoor air quality, and particularly with existing residential projects. You know, I'd love to see improved indoor air quality, not just from like mold mitigations as a result of improved windows or improved venting, but really improved immediate air quality from not having an additional burden of some toxic construction materials in your house while you live there. So that's a great point.
Michael, and then Janet.
I was just going to say that I really appreciate Ramfis making that point, and that it, you know, it makes for a safer environment for workers, for the community, for the residents. Yeah, all those.
Janet, did you have a comment? Nope, hand went down. Okay, well, I think that we can tweak the language on this criteria so that it's a little bit stronger on the particularly construction, like not just like articulating a commitment, but actually sort of stating a commitment for this project related to materials and supplies, to be able to kind of incorporate that into what would be required to get full points. Anything else? Oh, Faith.
Thanks for bearing with my non-digital hand raise.
No
Did you,
worries.
I heard a couple people, I really love that conversation, and Renfis, thank you for bringing it up. I heard healthy building materials as well, embodied in those conversations, but there's nothing in this criteria that says that. It says environmental impacts, which maybe gets there. Do we want to be more specific and include healthy building materials? Or even healthy materials? And not only in the how do you get all the points, but actually in the criteria itself. So I'm curious what others think about that too.
So yes, generally speaking, we have included kind of health benefits under, not under environmental, but the environmental benefits, but under the social benefits category. But there is nothing that explicitly speaks to material choice in the criteria related to health benefits. So I think that could be another potential good sort of change that speaks to that. Robin?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Isn't some of that could be reflected in number 4? Additional non-GHG environmental benefits?
So the additional non-GHG environmental benefits are really like habitat creation, flood mitigation, shade, those sorts of things. But the health benefits are captured in the kind of in the social benefits category. So they are captured, but they're just not captured in the environmental benefits. This is part of the challenge of categorizing when you live in a connected ecosystem, like all of them in the world, that there's a crossover. Faith?
I would just say in the worlds in which I travel in, it would go here. And it would go under number 3, right? When you're talking about building materials, because you're talking about the choices that you're making in the materials and the construction. And that's where it would, in the lexicon that I work in, which I think it would show up here rather than the social benefits. And I think it's partly because it's the building industry that's driving it. So maybe it's, maybe it doesn't matter, but depending on who's filling out the application, they're going to be thinking about it here, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the way that the sort of scoring is organized is not necessarily the way that the application will be organized. Yeah. But I think that it's fine if it is here, as long as when the committee starts to think about how important what weighting they want to give to each category, they're like really remembering what's within each category. So when you see environmental benefits and you're like, oh, I want to assign that a weight of like 0.2 or 0.3, just making sure that you remember that that includes a health benefit criteria. So I think that's just the distinction there. Janet?
Well, just along with the point of the air quality stuff showing up in the social, I just wanted to be clear that difference between 3 and 4 is, 4 is it's providing a benefit. We've reduced flooding, we've provided habitat, and the 3 is we're thinking about environmental impact. And to clarify, I was hearing folks talk about the construction materials, which would be a piece of it, but it was supposedly with material and operational choices, not just the construction materials, but things like you have a green fleet, your other purchasing decisions that you make, you're thinking about environmental impact. So just to clarify, if it's going to only be construction and how you would score and frame that, or if it was those other, you know, businesses that are prioritizing sustainability, green stuff.
I think that you can include everything into the sort of description and just say, if it is a construction project, here's what you would need to do to get full.
I just wanted to make sure we were clear on what was behind the thinking.
Michael?
Hi, would it be, this is just, it's a quick wordsmith. Would it be as simple as in number 3, as adding in the, I don't know, third to last line, commitment can be demonstrated by documenting procurement and operations policies and or certifications that detail how carbon and other environmental and health impacts are considered? Just add and health.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
You would just want to be sure you weren't double counting then, because if you're putting your health one up in social and you gave it points in 2 places, you just need to be clear if that matters to you.
Yeah, I just didn't see, I didn't see anywhere where material and operational choices are in social benefits.
No, and they're not right now. I think they would need to, it would need to be added there, the sort of health impacts of the material operational choices. So we can, I mean, I am hearing a general consensus that there is a desire to have the health impacts of material and operational choices incorporated into how you get a full points for this. And we can definitely, and Michael, I think your suggestion definitely makes sense there. To Janet's point, having health show up kind of in 2 different criteria isn't necessarily bad. Health is pretty important, but we just sort of, need to be aware of that when you get to the point after this meeting, or, sometime tomorrow or this weekend when you're kind of rating the level of importance of each of the criteria. Okay, social benefits. This is a fairly long list. Or no, it's not, it's 5, but it's just a fairly wordy slide. Any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions on this one? Andrea?
On number 5, I just want to acknowledge that some of the applicants might already be integrating mitigation measures into their existence. Like they might be a tenant advocacy organization who's co-applying, or they might be a tenant-owned property that's applying. So just leaving space for the fact that they could just be describing what they're already doing as opposed to having to get points for doing more.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can definitely make that clear in the guidance. Any other questions or comments on this one, on social benefits? Ranfis?
Yeah, I think, for number 5, if there's any wiggle room to sort of consider, reversing displacement, just because we talk about the history of displacement, but now as we talk about displacement as a given moment in time, period of time, we just know that there's people displaced. I know that's sort of hard to measure and track and encourage, but I think when we think about, restoration and healing in the community, that seems like it's not just the mitigation part, it's about the restorative part. So I think I feel like it's probably a longer conversation, but just I think something for us to sort of consider and meditate on.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on the social benefit criteria? Not surprisingly easy for that one. Okay, now we're back to the work. Oh, Megan.
Sorry, mine was really brief and I was slow at doing my little thing, but just that the climate resiliency, you know, I'm a stickler for like, why not use our own guiding principles? Why don't we say improves climate justice or something? I don't know. Resiliency seems vague when the points being made are really specific to frontline communities. Well, and workers. Anyway, it's a small point.
Mm-hmm.
And then another comment that I don't think we capture health very well in this one. So it makes me more of a fan of Faith et al.'s previous suggestion of integrating particularly attention to workers or something on the previous slide.
So does anybody, I will say the reason that we use the term climate resiliency specifically here instead of justice, and I think that it could, I mean, be interested in what other folks think, is part of what we're trying to get at with this one specifically is the kind of adaptation and mitigation to the impacts of current and future kind of the hazards of climate change, like heat and vector-borne illnesses and those sorts of things, making communities either kind of hardened to that or creating adaptation and or creating adaptation paths. So I think it was maybe just an attempt to be slightly more specific, I guess, than climate justice.
Yeah, I hear that. Or actually, I think climate justice in some ways is more, they're just specific in different ways.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. And we have kind of the 3 different points. I think it's fine. Personally. Yeah.
Andrea?
I'll just say that for me, this is another thing that signals health, because a lot of the things that make us more resilient to a changing climate make us healthy now and in the future. Addressing air quality, providing shade, respite, etc. So, and I think resiliency triggers those particular things for me.
Okay, now we are back on workforce and contractor related topics. So this is broken into a few slides, broken into a couple different slides to try and make really clear kind of which criteria would apply to which types of projects. Did that feel clear to everyone? Are there questions remaining about that? All right, I'm going to assume if you're, Faith.
It could be that I just haven't spent enough time, but I have to say I'm confused about why the distinction between single site versus multi-site.
So
I think that's another question I had as well, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, and so I just also want to, I'll let Sam or Janet take that. And Megan, I'm just going to lower your hand unless you have another question. And I also just wanted to note on this slide that it says projects less than 500,000, but in our earlier conversation, we agreed that that would be, we're kind of now thinking that we will be lowering that to 350,000. So that applies to the next slide as well.
Yeah, and that's just to align those. So I think the rationale for us around sort of the single site was that we do expect to see proposals come in where you're going to have folks apply for, you know, projects in the realm of 300,000, but it's going to be disaggregated across, you know, they're going to be doing projects across 20, 30 homes at the $10,000, $20,000 each, where they may be employing 10 plus multiple different contractors that we assume would be smaller contractors. So it was sort of as a scale of a singular project that you would, that a contractor as a GC would take on. At what point can we ask that kind of detailed information about their strategies where they're working at that kind of scale on a project? At what point would we want to know information about the particular contractor, their subcontractor utilization, their workforce utilization? So it was just a function of the types of contractors that would come in and take on a project at that scale versus a contractor that would be going in and maybe certainly could be taking, you know, if there's a, let's say there's a home weatherization project proposal that comes in, and it's going to come in and they're going to weatherize I mean, let's say 100 homes, and that may be optimistic. Let's just say 50 homes at $10,000 each. That comes in at a $500,000 proposal, but it may be that there's only a handful of contractors getting each of those scopes. So it just felt like for the burden of asking this kind of detailed information and being able to get it and actually having that relationship with the contractor, we thought it was reasonable to expect that if you're bidding, if you're making a proposal for a project at a singular site, you're going to have to go for a GC, and at that point, you should have done your shopping and have a sense for who your GC may be, where you can get this kind of detailed information.
So Ramfis and James both have their hands up, but I did want to note that it's 7:57, and so if folks can hang with us for a few more minutes, then then that would be great. But also, we understand that you might have other things you need to do.
Yeah. And I'll try just real quick. Also, GC general contractor is what I meant there. I apologize for the acronym. But this is in part in response to, I think, Jeffrey, your point last week that at a certain threshold, we want to have firm information on who contractors are. So that's sort of where we came to this point, where that's the threshold on which we would ask firmly that what's your information around these bits of.
And just to clarify, and it's not that we don't ask questions less than that. We ask about their strategies around inclusive recruitment and utilization for contractors and workforce, but you can't expect that they know who all the contractors are going to be and that they can have all that information. So they would just, but at a larger scale, like Jeffrey and Michael brought up last week, you would know who your people are, and that's when we would get firmer numbers as opposed to just the strategies that they are planning to have in place.
So,
yeah, that was pretty much what I was going to say. Just a reminder that this is what is knowable and what we're expecting at the front end, not the elements that would be reported on later, which is a different set. But this is what we'd be looking at and evaluating at the beginning.
So I guess I would just, the only other thing I might point out is that at the last meeting, when we were talking about kind of, examples of when you would have a contractor on, have been talking with a contractor and maybe got some bids and have that relationship going. I think the example that Jeffrey gave was $5 million, and the example that Michael gave was $100,000. So what we have here is $350,000. So that could be just, a product of the different types of work in different areas, but just to kind of point that out, that's where we landed. Ramfis?
I guess to this question, does the context change if it's the middle of a project and you already have those concrete numbers in terms of?
Say it again.
So does the context for these questions change when it's a project that's already ongoing, that's got your contractor selected and your workforce, that can tell you what the hard goals are? Like, is there wiggle room for those who can say, that we can give maximum scores to folks who say, I can tell you what our hard goals are for contract equity and workforce equity that would be competitive to those who can only tell you what their strategies are or what their projections are, compared to a contractor who could say, I can tell you what we're doing because we're doing it right now.
Yeah, in the scoring, if I'm hearing you correctly, Ramfis, the scoring currently, your highest score is if you're working with a contractor with a proven track record of that inclusive hiring and the strong plan to do so on this project. And so if I heard you correctly, then that's a response, unless I missed your question.
I think what I'm hearing is it's that the contractor that can prove to you that they're actually concretely hitting their numbers can tell you what are the concrete numbers. It sounds like they're still on par with someone who is saying that they have someone who's have a track record of meeting those numbers.
So if I said, so if I'm the applicant and I have a contractor, well, just to clarify, are you talking about the 350 and above or the ones that are below?
Below.
The below. The below, you get more points if you have selected a contractor with a record and a plan. So one could have a contractor in hand, in which case you're rewarded for that. But it's not required that you have your contractor in hand like it is above 350.
And then I guess kind of like to the point of Faith's original question, does the context change about multiple sites if, say, you have one, someone who's doing a set of projects, whether they're retrofits in a neighborhood, all the, or a block, if you will, and it's a person, whether it's one general contractor or the beneficiary is one landlord, does the context of multiple sites change? So
I think that,
here we have here in the city of Portland, we have landlords who own multiple sites, who could potentially own multiple sites. When we do these solar or energy retrofits, I guess I kind of wonder, are there special considerations when those multiple sites might be owned by the same owner or performed by one general contractor with a set workforce?
It's a great question. I don't think we fully, I don't think that we haven't fully accounted for that. And I think there are going to be many of those sort of if-thens that in some ways it's in part what I think we want to, I don't have a great answer to that, other than there's going to be a little bit of learning to see sort of how that does play out. Because I think that's a fair question to see whether an entity does multiple projects across various sites, but are using one general contractor. And so for that one general contractor, it's still functionally, it's a big project for them, but it's happening across multiple sites. So it's a great question. I think that's an area that in some ways I'd love to be able to, it'd be great to get feedback on, and it'd be a great opportunity in the public comment potentially to get feedback on that. This is certainly something folks are paying attention to. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Michael just had his hand up for a little while.
So I'm gonna open a little bag of worms here, snakes, whatever they are. So if a project is already in swing and may not be, and the existing contractors on it, so that they're applying for PCEF funds as an additive or stacking funds on top of a project that's already in construction phase. Are we going to have exemptions for some of our workforce since they are already working?
Exemptions in
and this
what way?
is exemptions in so I mean, and I should have just kept my mouth shut, but exemptions in kind of all, I guess, in exemptions for, say, prevailing wage, or exemptions for recruitment and retention strategies if the contractors are already on the job. Are we going to ask that the contractors change wages if they're not paying prevailing wage? Are we going to ask that they change their diversity requirements mid-job, or would we just not consider doing additive funds to an existing project, or a project where they want to, say, use PCEF funds to add a solar system that's integrated and the electrical company already exists on the project? The electrical contractor.
Ramfis has his hand up, but I will say, as the criteria are currently written and the guidance is currently written, they would be evaluated as if they were brand new. So if they happen to be a contractor who has a strong recruitment retention and advancement policy and has a diverse workforce, they would score well. And if they weren't, they wouldn't. They would score less well. Yeah. Ranfis?
Maybe I didn't capture the way I guess I heard Michael's question. I guess I wonder is like, say you have an ongoing project, you that's like a solar installation, someone applies for it, and I guess we have the 180% minimum wage standard. Is that retroactive? That's I think I don't know if that's what asking that question. I kind of raised it. I kind of just wondered that. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I guess I would acknowledge is we are, I mean, and it's a question, and I think there's a question in public comment, a couple of public comments ago around reimbursing projects, but presumably if those projects are going, those projects have been funded already. And so in an application, you'd be, if there's a proposal, it'd be funding an addition, something new. And so for doing that additional something new work, we will ask them what are their commitments for that work. And certainly they can say, we've already been doing half of this. You know, we already did this portion of this building roof solar, and we have numbers from that project to inform what we're going to do in this proposal. So they would actually, in some ways, have good data to inform what they would do in that proposal, but it would be taken and valued at that for their future proposal. So I think that question will apply if and when we broach this question around reimbursements, but to the extent that we are getting proposals for additional work, not to reimburse previous work. But it's going to have complications because you're hitting on a point where there's going to be projects that are in phase currently and they add on additional scopes. And so they're going to have to speak to those scopes and how they work and marry with their existing work. And if the general contractor is going to take on that additional scope, they'll have to speak to what the general contractor is doing. But some of these pieces we'll also just tease out as we implement and get proposals. So there's some of these questions we just won't fully be able to answer, but we are not talking about reimbursing. Yeah.
And the requirements of the PCEF requirements follow the PCEF dollars. Like they're only attached to the PCEF dollars.
It does raise the question of if they got funded to do sort of like when prevailing wage kicks back, like if they got 200,000 to weatherize and then came back for another 150 or 2 for putting in solar, now they'd be over that 350. So does that next piece, even though that piece isn't 350, would the total PCEF dollars be 350 and then you'd have to, yeah.
What I'll acknowledge is we're at a high level here. A lot of those details we will have to frame out. And so some of those details we won't figure out in this first year. That's just the reality of this, that we'll say, oh, we missed that one, and we'll answer it and we'll say, we're going to come back and flesh that out. But I mean, these are certainly good details. And so so I think that's what I'll leave at, because we can, this definitely pulls on a thread that there's many what ifs that we can answer, but we'll do our best to provide that guidance as we get out to the RFP.
Any other comments on this, on the workforce and contractor benefits? And I'm just going to advance to the next slide, but I mean, because these are for the capital projects that are greater than now $350,000. But if you have a comment on the former slide, obviously, let us know. Any concerns here, thoughts? Getting close to bedtime. So Jeffrey and then Ranfis.
Just real quick, at what point, I'm not sure, maybe I'm just not seeing it. Where's the point where they would look at the actual staff of the contractors and the nonprofit or the owner, whoever the owner is going to be? Is this the threshold that will fall under? When we start to see, like, if with the engineers and that kind of stuff, and like that mid-tier that we talked about last week.
Yes, Janet, can you speak to that real quick and then get Ranfis's question or comment?
Yeah, and Sam, you can jump in here as well, but my understanding is that on that item 6, you're looking at, maybe that needs to be stated more strongly in there. So the idea being that your contractor has a record of, oh yeah, because the hiring, sorry, that's inclusive. So the number 11, the non-apprentice workers, that you have a contractor with a strong record of recruitment, retention, and advancement of diverse workers. And so we need to be clear in that guidance that that means not just the trade labor workers, but throughout the staff.
Yeah, like the management team pretty much is, I guess, the
Yeah.
best way to describe it. The
Yeah.
management team. How diverse is the management team? People are going to be helping direct the work.
Though, and with a question on that being, what does it mean to have a management team with these small contractors that are like, you know, the spouse at the kitchen table and the person? So we have to think about that for the scoring, but thank you for pointing out that that's not as clear as it needs to be.
So Ramses and then Michael.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Michael on this one. I think it'd be great to not just talk about the strategy, but similar to, I think, our conversation on the environmental plank, that can actually demonstrate actual disaggregation of utilization of a diverse workforce for both administrative, but even as it applies to your apprentice and non-apprentice utilization. I think there will be folks who can demonstrate that, and I think if you have those folks who can demonstrate that, we should reward the behavior that can make that strong demonstration. Obviously, we still want to be inclusive for folks who don't have that contractor in hand, who cannot demonstrate that. But I think you just want to reward good behavior from, and I know this is on the contractor piece, but I think this is, if we can get that disaggregated and a demonstration, that's good points. And I think that's how we'll create a system that rewards folks who are really making the effort to diversify the trades. And I'll probably even say the same thing here for contracting, those who can show demonstrated actual commitments or MOUs of actual contractors that will be diverse contractors will be utilized, helps move the needle. I'm going to pause here myself. Sorry,
Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say, perhaps it's just that it's the workforce utilization is throughout the company or organization from top to bottom. And it's been a while since I ate. I'm starting to lose it. I forgot what else I was going to say. I lowered my hand.
Okay. We're almost there. We have just one more slide after this, and it only has 2 criteria on it. Any other sort of parting thoughts on this one? All right, so the last thing is budget. And the 2 criteria there are leverage provided, and then that the project budget is complete and reasonable. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So what we will do is update the scoring memo, and we'll highlight any of the changes so that you don't have to go searching for them, and send that out to you tomorrow with a reminder to please take the time to do the survey as soon as you can, so that we have an opportunity to kind of think about what your collective responses look like. And when we spoke with Shanice earlier, we let her know that we'd been sending that to her as well, and so she's kind of prepped to take that survey too. So Sam, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we ask for if there are any committee comments and then close out?
No, I just, no, I think, thank you all. Thank you all. I really appreciate this. And there's going to be, the survey is long. It is long, but it's just hopefully keep the memo side by side and think about each of those criteria and really think about just what's, all of them are important, but what's, how do you rate the importance of each of those? And that'll just give us, and when we come back to y'all, we'll give you a sense of where you all stand relative to each other and where those spreads are and where the average is. So we get to dig into where you all felt like you ranked things very differently in terms of importance versus where you all were pretty close. And then when we get to that, so, but otherwise, just wanted to say that we're getting close, and we're getting close, and we're about to bring in other folks' feedback pretty soon here. So this is just that interim step, and thank you all.
All right, any committee member comments?
Were we gonna set a time frame that we need to hear back from?
Oh, I mean, I was just gonna send in a deadline in the email, but
Great.
yeah, if you guys could, I don't know what your weekend plans are or how far how much the quarantine has you working in the off hours. But since you're all volunteers, I think we can ask you to potentially work over the weekend on stuff that we send you. So if you could get it to us by the beginning, in the morning on Tuesday or on Monday, that would be great. I think we definitely want to have a chance to think about the responses that we got, and particularly look at areas where there seems to be a large variance in kind of level of importance assigned to each criteria and things like that. And so that we can get material prepped for our next meeting as soon as possible to send out to you. All right, any committee member comments?
Thank you, everybody, for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks,
everyone.
folks. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Everyone,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all,
Bye,
the
everybody.
audience.
Good night.
Yep.
Have a great weekend.